Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with the unprecedented historic moment in American politics. Donald Trump has been found guilty in the first criminal trial of a former U.S. president in the nation's history, 5 months before this year's presidential election. 12 New York jurors found Trump guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying business records to conceal a hush money payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 election. Prosecutors argued it was a conspiracy that deprived voters of vital information before they cast their votes in 2016. Trump spoke after the verdict came down.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people.
And Donald Trump criticized Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who led the charges.
You have a sore respect, DA, and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man.
And now former President Donald Trump is due for sentencing on July 11th, after which he plans to appeal.
Well, Nathan, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg also spoke after the verdict, saying his office handled this case like any other.
While this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors.
Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg called the case a white-collar prosecution core to the mission of his office. Bragg thanked the jury for their deliberations after the 5-week trial.
Well, Karen, one of the key questions following the verdict is whether or not Donald Trump will become the first U.S. president sentenced to prison. Legal ramifications are unclear at the moment, but Bloomberg Law host June Grosso explains the likely next steps.
Donald Trump will be sentenced on July 11th. Each of the 34 counts is a Class E felony, which can carry a prison term of up to 4 years. A typical defendant convicted of a felony charge is sentenced to serve some prison time, but there's nothing in the law that requires it. Judge Juan Merchan could instead sentence Trump to probation, especially if he decides that leniency is warranted because the former president is 77 years old and a first-time offender with no criminal record. In New York, June Grosso, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, June, thank you. So how will the conviction impact Donald Trump's presidential run? Republican strategist Matt Gorman tells Bloomberg's Balance of Power things will stay status quo.
It's going to be a typical Trump news cycle in this respect. There's going to be a lot of noise. I don't think at the end it changes anything that dramatic. This is going to be a competitive presidential election. It was today. It'll be tomorrow. It was yesterday.
Republican strategist Matt Gorman. And on the other side of the aisle, Democratic strategist Kristen Hahn says President Biden needs to capitalize on the conviction.
It's still going to be a tight race, but President Trump has laid the groundwork here. I think it's going to be up to the Biden campaign to figure out where and when they need to push back on this now that he's finally been convicted, because it really is a huge deal.
Democratic strategist Kristen Hahn added that Democrats need to focus on fundraising between now and the conventions.
Well, Karen, President Biden's 2024 campaign has already put out fundraising appeals following the verdict, and it released a statement in response saying it showed no one is above the law, adding that, quote, there is still only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box.
Nathan, we also heard from Trump and Biden's political rival, independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He told a crowd in Austin last night the outcome will actually benefit the former president.
My belief is that it will end up helping President Trump among America, a large part of American public who believes that the judicial system and the enforcement system have been weaponized.
Independent Robert F. Kennedy Jr. also called the verdict a mistake that will politically backfire on Democrats.
And Karen, we continue to watch the political fallout in the nation's capital. We get that part of the story from Bloomberg's Amy Morris in Washington.
The Biden-Harris campaign released a statement saying, quote, we saw that no one is above the law. House Speaker Mike Johnson posted on X that, quote, today is a shameful day in American history. Bloomberg's Megan Scully says lawmakers on Capitol Hill are all in campaign mode, and this guilty verdict is a factor.
We have tons of legislation coming to the floor that are messaging votes, things that are never going to become law, but that are good for their candidates to vote on. And I think that there will certainly be some messaging legislation targeted at supporting Donald Trump.
Bloomberg's Megan Scully on Bloomberg's Balance of Power. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thank you. Well, we do also have some important news in the markets today. All eyes are on a key data point that's out at 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time, the PCE deflator, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge. And Bloomberg's Michael McKee has a preview.
For the Fed, PCE inflation is the number. Their 2% inflation target is based on the PCE. The good news is this measure of inflation is expected to tick down, at least on a year-over-year basis, suggesting the central bank is still making progress on its goal. Some analysts think the core rate could even come in lower month over month, which might lead to a strong market reaction. What it won't do, up or down, is change forecasts for the Fed's next meeting on June 12th. Policymakers have made it clear they'll need more than one good report to start considering any change in rates. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Mike, thank you. We are also following more Fed speak, this time from New York President John Williams. He says inflation is headed in the right direction. More in this report from Bloomberg's John Tucker. John.
And Nate Williams telling the Economic Club of New York he expects inflation to continue falling in the second half of this year, and that higher borrowing costs are restraining the economy just the way they want.
The behavior of the economy over the past year provides ample evidence that monetary policy is restrictive in a way that helps achieve our goals. We're seeing clear and consistent signs that the imbalances between supply and demand in the economy are receding, and we've seen a broad-based decline in inflation.
Williams can't say when he'd support a rate cut and that any rate increase is unlikely. He sees inflation, as measured by the PCE price index, falling to about 2.5% by year end before moving closer to their 2% target next year. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. And again, repeating our top story of the morning, Donald Trump is the first U.S. president to be found guilty in a criminal trial. We will have coverage for you of this historic moment in American politics all morning long.
Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Local reaction continues to come in after former President Donald Trump was found guilty on all 34 counts in his hush money trial. People outside the Manhattan courthouse had mixed views.
It just seems to me like the fix was in that they were out to get Trump. But I think he's going to get more popular with the American people.
I am feeling emotional because I have 6 grandchildren, and I want the United States to be for them what it was for me, which, is a baby boomer, which is growing up with presidents that you can admire and feel safe with and look up to.
Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul said in a statement, today's verdict reaffirms that no one is above the law. Republican Representative Nicole Malliotakis, who represents New York's 11th Congressional District, said in a statement, today's verdict is a complete but sadly unsurprising miscarriage of justice. In Connecticut, flags are being flown at half-staff after a state trooper was killed by a hit-and-run driver on Interstate 84 yesterday afternoon. Trooper Aaron Pelletier was performing a traffic stop when police say another vehicle crossed into the right shoulder, striking and killing Pelletier. That driver later taken into custody after their vehicle became disabled. Connecticut State Police Colonel Daniel Lockman.
He was a role model to younger troopers, and he set a high standard for them to follow. But he was much more than that. Aaron was a loving husband and a father of 2 young children.
Lieutenant Governor Susan Bisewitz.
He was trying to reduce highway crashes and fatalities when he died.
So far, charges against the driver who hit Trooper Pelletier have not been revealed. A Minnesota police officer was killed when he responded to a shooting call and was providing medical attention to a man who shot him in what authorities are calling an ambush. Minneapolis Assistant Police Chief Katie Blackwell.
This has been a terrible day for our agency and in law enforcement. And it's happening all too frequently, and it affects so many.
The suspected gunman and another person were also killed in the shooting. Truckers have joined in the fight against congestion pricing in Manhattan. The Trucking Association of New York filed a federal lawsuit against the MTA. They argue the toll plan unconstitutionally targets the trucking industry. Under the MTA plan set to start in late June, trucks will be charged between $24 to $36 per trip. Drivers of passenger cars will pay about $15. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
All right, good morning, Karen. Another close one between the Rangers and Panthers after 3 straight overtime games. Scoreless first period in Game 5 at the Garden. Chris Kreider got his first goal of the series. A short-handed breakaway 2 minutes into the second. Panthers tied it, took the lead midway through the third. They added an empty netter. Alexis Lafreniere scored in the final minute, but Florida won 3-2, and now leading the series 3-2. The Rangers coach is Peter Laviolette.
Wasn't going to be wide open, and we were going to have 40 chances a night, so we need to capitalize on some of the ones that we did generate, and we weren't able to do that tonight. It was, like I said, it was tight. The game was tight. I thought we had looks. I thought we had chances. They didn't go in. It came down to 1 goal.
Game 6 tomorrow in South Florida. The NBA Finals are set. Boston against Dallas. The Celtics, top seeds in the East. The Mavs were the 5 seed in the West. They dismantled Minnesota in Game 5, 124-103. Wasn't that close. Mavs shot 61%, led by 29 at halftime. Both Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving scored 36 points. It's the Mavs' first trip to the finals since winning the championship in 2011. Yankees moved 20 games over 500, beat the Angels in Anaheim 8-3. Aaron Judge homered. Yanks broke it open with a 5-run 7th inning that included a 3-run triple by Juan Soto. Much-needed win for the Mets after losing 15 of 19. They rallied atop Arizona at Citi Field 3-2. Francisco Lindor had 4 hits, including a home run. J.D. Martinez's homer in the 8th put the Mets ahead. Red Sox held to 2 hits, lost to Detroit 5-0. Nationals won 3-1 in Atlanta. The French Open, Novak Djokovic advanced. So did Americans Taylor Fritz and Tommy Paul. At the U.S. Women's Open Golf, Lancaster, PA, Nelly Korda, the big favorite. She's won 6 of her last 7 tournaments, but in opening round 80 because Korda had a 10 on the par 3 third hole. She put it in the water 3 times. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. On a morning after a former president and a major party candidate in the next presidential election became a convicted felon for the first time in American history, the guilty verdicts for Donald Trump come with legal and political implications. So let's get right to it. Joining us now, Bloomberg News legal reporter Eric Larson, who was in the Manhattan courthouse as those verdicts came down. Eric, good morning. Paint a picture for us, because listening from the outside, we heard the verdicts come down like dominoes, one after the other, guilty on count 1, 2, 3, etc. What was it like inside the courtroom as the jury foreman read out those verdicts?
It was a very solemn moment. There was quite a bit of tension. The former president was there with his entire legal team and many supporters, including his son. The district attorney was there with many of his prosecutors, and of course, there was a lot of press packed into that courtroom. The jury filed out, and the jury foreman was asked to stand up and read out the finding for each of the 34 counts, and he just read out guilty 34 times in a row. It was pretty unexpected, actually. Everyone in the courtroom believed that they were about to be excused for the day around 4:30 in the afternoon, because that's when the jury was supposed to wrap up. And there was no indication they were going to stay late. The judge had everyone gather, said he was about to dismiss the jury, left the courtroom for a few minutes, and came back and said, well, actually, they have a verdict. So it was quite a surprise. Trump had a very solemn, you could say potentially angry look on his face, more so than during most of the trial, and walked out of the courtroom without glancing at any members of the press, as he had done many times throughout the trial. He just had a stoic look on his face and walked out.
Well, we certainly saw and heard that anger and frustration following the verdict as he came out to address reporters last evening, and he's promising to fight on all the way. What could that fight look like? What could the appeals process look like for the former president?
It's an appeal process that can't technically start until he is sentenced. That's on July 11th. So it's not until he finds out how much time he'll spend in prison, if any, not until then will he actually be able to start his appeal. That could drag on for a while. I've been told by legal experts, though, that in many cases, individuals who are convicted for crimes like this are sent to jail if there is a prison term while they appeal, because the idea being that just because someone is appealing, they shouldn't be able to drag out the consequences of a jury's verdict by simply appealing and dragging that out as long as possible. So it remains to be seen whether or not he would be allowed to remain free during the appeal. It also remains to be seen if the judge will even sentence him to any time behind bars. Of course, probation is an option. There's no mandatory sentence for prison here. The maximum, of course, is 4 years, but experts have said that even if he is sentenced to an incarceratory period, that it would be nothing near that. Trump is a first-time offender here. This isn't a kind of crime that involves traditional types of victims. So the judge has some leeway if he wants to give him a sentence that does not involve time behind bars.
Are we expecting to hear from the jury?
Yeah, that's a $1 million question here. Obviously, the jury was an anonymous jury, very rare, usually reserved for cases involving the mafia or terrorism cases, something where the jury is in real danger. And the prosecutors argued and the judge agreed that this jury should be anonymous for their own safety, given Trump's track record of attacking people involved in the cases against him. And as he did throughout the case, of course, Trump was threatened with jail during the trial for violating a gag order multiple times that was intended to protect the safety of the jury and the witnesses. Once the judge made it very clear to Trump that if he violated that gag order again, he would put him in jail, even if it meant having his Secret Service, in there with him. He said, "I will do this," and that stops Trump from doing that. So you can see that how serious it was. But after the verdict was handed down, the judge told the jury everything, all the rules that I've told you about not talking to anyone, including the press or your family. That's all lifted now. You can do what you want, but you can imagine. Some of the jurors might be torn here. Some would want to protect their safety, the safety of their families. It's no surprise. Trump has a lot of supporters, and some of them have resorted to violence in the past. And they're going to be very upset about this conviction. But there might be other jurors who are willing to take that risk and want to, tell America what they were thinking and when they came to this verdict,
right.
And why they did.
One more thing to watch as we continue to follow the ramifications of these guilty verdicts for the former president. Eric, thank you for this. Eric Larson, legal reporter for Bloomberg News, who was in the courtroom as those verdicts came down. We want to look at the political impact now with Greg Valliere joining us now, Chief U.S. Policy Strategist at AGF Investments. Greg, good morning. When I heard those verdicts came down last evening, the image that came to my mind was from actually several years ago when former President Trump was in the White House and he held up the newspaper after he was acquitted in impeachment. Obviously, he's not holding up any newspapers this morning. What are the political impacts of a criminal conviction, a felony conviction for a former president?
Well, good morning, Nathan. We're really in uncharted waters right now. Obviously, nothing like this has ever happened in the U.S., so it may be a few weeks before public opinion gels. Will the public say this is just a witch hunt against Trump, or will the public say we got Trump fatigue? We need to get rid of this guy. So I don't think that the public has really solidified its opinion just yet.
Well, we did get some snap polls from YouGov moments after the verdicts came down. Whether Trump got a fair trial, yes, by 10 points. Whether they agree that he's guilty, yes, by 20 points. Obviously, you get very different margins when you break it down by party. Could that translate into how Americans vote in November?
It could, and I've been making the point for the last few days that the next biggest story is on June 27th. That's the first debate between Biden and Trump. I think that's going to be pivotal. If Trump looks rusty and stumbles at all, that could hurt him. If Biden has a gaffe, which he's been known to do, that could hurt him. I think the rest of the election, the tone will be set on June 27th.
I'm so glad you mentioned the debate. It's coming up in less than 4 weeks, and you have to think that even several weeks after the verdict, this is going to overshadow everything, isn't it?
Yeah, the first debate 4 years ago got 13 million people. I think they could get 20 million. This is going to be such a highly anticipated debate. So with 20 million people, there's an opportunity for either candidate to gain a point or two, and that could sort of set the tone for the rest of the fall.
How does the political punditry handle something like this when the major party candidate on one side of the aisle is a convicted felon?
Yeah, I know. It's awkward for people, but it's worth noting that the Republicans are, in my opinion, extraordinarily well unified. Maybe 20% of the Republicans have some doubts, but I think Trump has really strong support in his own party, and I think the overwhelming view is that he hasn't been treated fairly.
Core support from core voters, obviously, and we've seen Republican elected officials pretty much all in all line up behind not just supporting the president, but adopting a lot of his rhetoric about, the rigged nature, as the former president puts it, of this case. Is there a risk for Republicans if they continue to criticize the system that it could backfire on them?
Absolutely. Great point, Nathan. I think there are other issues, too, like abortion. So I think it's still way premature to write off Joe Biden. I realize he has many flaws, and a lot of the issues are broken against him. But I think that Biden still has a shot if the Republicans are playing this incorrectly.
And just quickly, how do you see the Biden campaign handling this? We've seen kind of a tepid statement up to this point, but do you see whether the Biden campaign can sort of shift the advantage that former President Trump has managed to make from pretty much all the legal issues he's had?
Yeah, they can, but my Lord, you look at Biden only ahead modestly in New York State. You look at Biden groveling for support among black voters. These are things that a Democrat shouldn't even have to worry about. So Biden still has a lot of ground to make up, but I do think there's a chance that the Republicans could overplay their hand with Donald Trump.
Thanks, Greg. As always, Greg Valliere, Chief U.S. Policy Strategist, AGF Investments.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
And Bloomberg's Lisa Mateo is here with the front page roundup. Obviously, every front page around the world is focused on the Trump verdict. But we had a big take story from Bloomberg News as well that says despite the guilty verdicts, Lisa, Wall Street billionaires are rushing to back the former president. Good morning.
Yeah, they are. Good morning, Nathan. So Ameed Malik, he's president of 1789 Capital. He co-hosted a fundraiser for Trump at the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue before the verdict, and he said that the outcome would have less than zero impact on his support. Now, the fundraiser, also hosted by billionaire Howard Lutnick. Hours before the verdict, hedge fund investor Bill Ackman was said to be leaning toward backing the former president. Then you have private equity mogul, longtime Republican donor Steven Schwartzman said he was getting behind Trump again. I mean, a big reason for the support that you'll see through this article, it says that it's money. Trump has promised to cut taxes for the wealthy, eliminate regulations. President Joe Biden wants the opposite.
Yeah, also an article here in the New York Post, Lisa, about Trump's campaign donation page, which crashed after the verdict.
Yeah, it did. Less than an hour after he was convicted, his campaign wrote on X that the WinRed pages, it went down. Trump advisor Chris LaCivita, he said the outage was due to, quote, millions of American patriots wanting to donate to Donald Trump's campaign. Then you had Lee Zeldin, a Trump campaign surrogate. He's also a former Long Island congressman. He posted on X that one of Trump's campaign committees reportedly secured an $800,000 donation shortly after the verdict. What might have overwhelmed the site, well, after the jury's decision, there was a post on Truth Social from the Trump National Committee. It said that it called him a political prisoner. It said that your support is the only thing standing between us and the total tyranny. But that website, it was back online about a half hour after it went down.
And speaking of Truth Social, Lisa, the Post is also pointing out that shares of that social media app's parent company tumbled after the verdict.
Yeah, so this morning, shares of Trump Media and Technology Group, that's the owner of, yes, Truth Social, still lower before the bell. They're down about 7% right now. The stock was down about 9% after hours trading after the news of the verdict. Trades under the ticker DJT, and it's been really extremely volatile since its debut in late March. It peaked at nearly $80 in intraday trading on March 26th, and then early this month, Trump Media reported that it lost more than $300 million last quarter.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.